The Jewish people are known, in the desert at least, to be complainers. And generally speaking, that's not a good thing. However, from time to time, complaining can be a good thing. And this week's Torah portion includes many negative complaints, but at least one positive complaint. Perhaps more than one. There's more complaining in this parsha probably than any other parsha of the Torah. Torah portion of Bahalotecha. And I want to jump to Shlishi. Let me pull up the screen. Okay. Where are we over here? Shlishi, the third aliyah. And the section we are studying is third section. Show Rashi's commentary. The section we're going to study is about the topic of Pesach Sheni, which was the second Passover, the one holiday where we have a second opportunity for it. Pesach Sheni, which represents second chances. And they say a story about two people who go hunting. They go to Canada to hunt moose. So they're hunting moose, and they catch 6 moose. That's how it's pronounced. 6 moose. Moose. So they catch 6 of them, and now they need to be able to schlep it back to where they live. I don't know, in New York or somewhere. So they look for someone who could help them travel back. So they find someone who has a little plane. They say, "Can you take us back, us along with our 6 moose?" And the guy says, "There's no way I can do that. My plane could seat 4 people, but there's no way you can also schlep 6 moose." So one of the guys says, "What are you talking about? Last year, we found someone who had the exact same type of plane, and he agreed to take us with our moose back." He said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." This is okay. So they put the moose onto the plane, take off. The flight takes off, and sure enough, later, a minute into the flight, takes a nosedive and crashes into the forest. Miraculously, everyone survives, and one of the hunters turns to the other and says, "You know, it's crazy. Last year, we crashed at this exact location." So this is the day of second chances. Second chances is in the Torah, most significantly in this section of the Torah. Let's read through it. Chapter 9, verse number 1. Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe. God spoke to Moshe b'midbar Sinai, at the desert of Sinai. Bashana hashenis l'tzeisa mi'eretz Mitzrayim, the second year when they left Egypt. Bachodesh harishon lemor, on the first month. Rashi says, this happened the second year after leaving Egypt. Bachodesh parsha sheberosh hasefer lo nemra Iyar. The portion at the beginning of the book of Numbers was not said until Iyar. Lamadeta, and here the Torah, Rashi says the Torah, there's an important message which we hear throughout the Torah. Lamadeta she'ein seder mukdam u'meuchar b'Torah. The Torah is not necessarily in chronological order, and therefore you cannot prove from one story in the Torah happening after the other in the Torah that and chronologically it happened that way. And this is one of the examples that this section happened not in the order of how it's recounted in the Torah, but out of order. And then he says something interesting. V'lama lo pasach bazu. Why was this not stated in order? If the Torah is mentioned out of order, you have to explain why. All right, so I accept that the Torah is not necessarily in chronological order. Very, very significantly, this plays a role in the book of Shemos, in the book of Exodus, when it talks about the order of how the collection for the tabernacle, the sin of the golden calf, and the building of the tabernacle. So in the Torah, it says it in that order. God commands Moshe about the tabernacle. Then there's the sin of the golden calf. And then there's the building of the tabernacle. That's the way it's listed in the Torah. But you actually have 3 different opinions as to what the order was exactly. And some opinions say that it all happened after the golden calf. Even the commandment to build the tabernacle happened after the golden calf, even though the Torah is listed beforehand. But when it is out of order, you have to explain why. So it could be out of order, but why? That's what Rashi is addressing now. Why was this mentioned later after events that took place after? And he says, because the story of the Karban Pesach, the Paschal offering, is a disgrace to the Jewish people. Why? Shekol Arbaim Shana Shahayu Yisrael Bamidbar, because all 40 years that the Jewish people were in the deserts, Lo Hikriv Ella Pesach Zabulvad. Out of 40 years in the desert, they only brought the Paschal offering 1 year, and that was this year. The other 39 years, they did not bring the Karban Pesach. I think it's connected to the fact that they did not necessarily circumcise themselves when they're in the desert, which was a ganus, which itself was a source of disgrace, but they didn't circumcise themselves in the desert until they arrived in Israel, and someone who is uncircumcised cannot bring a Karban Pesach. But this is the fact of the matter is that the Paschal offering, which was such an essential part of the Jewish holiday celebration, was not observed in the desert other than the first year they're in the desert. So they observed it in Egypt, but the first Paschal offering was brought in Egypt. That was before they left Egypt. Then once they left Egypt, it was 40 years until they arrived in Israel. It was, and only the first year did they bring the Paschal offering. The next 39 years they did not. Once they entered the land of Israel, they did the Paschal offering again. Fine. The Yasub Bnei Yisrael Pesach Mado. The Jewish people should observe the Pesach in its time. B'moado af b'Shabbos. You bring the Karban Pesach even on Shabbos. Now, even though this seems to be simple, it's the 14th of Nisan, Erev Pesach, falls on Shabbos, you should bring the Karban Pesach. These two words, that you bring it even on Pesach, was the source of a very fascinating story in the Talmud, a story which catapulted one of the most important Jewish leaders in history to leadership. And that is that it happened apparently for many, many years, during the time of the Second Temple, Erev Pesach, Pesach Eve, did not fall out on Shabbos. So the issue of bringing the Karban Pesach was not an issue that people thought of perhaps 30, 40, 50 years, because it didn't fall out on Friday. Then 1 year, it fell out on Friday, Erev Pesach. And nobody could remember whether the Karban overrides Shabbos. Sacrificing an animal on Shabbos would be a Shabbos violation. Slaughtering is a Shabbos violation. I'm going to guess that sacrificing a Karban includes several Shabbos violations. So it happened that after many, many years in which Shabbos did not fall out on Erev Pesach, they simply forgot. What is the law? And nobody knew. And Pesach was coming, and this was an enormous question. Do we all bring the Karban or not? And the leaders at the time were people called the Bnei Beseira, the children of Beseira. And they didn't remember. And then someone said, there happens to be a sage, a scholar here in town visiting from Babylonia, and maybe he knows the answer. And his name is Hillel. Let's bring in this guy Hillel, who was relatively unknown until that point, and maybe he knows the answer. And they brought in Hillel, and Hillel responded that he remembers studying under the previous leaders of the generation, which were Shmaya and Avtalion, and he quoted a verse which proved that the Karban is brought even on Erev Pesach, which falls out on Shabbos. The Karban overrides Shabbos. And immediately, and this is very profound, as soon as the Bnei Beseira, the other leaders, saw that Hillel knew the answer to this question, they immediately abdicated their position and said to Hillel, you now should be the leader. At which point Hillel, ironically, rebuked them. He said, how could you forget such an important rule? So this power of the story teaches us about Hillel. Hillel preserved the continuity of Torah law, but also the humility of the children of Beseira. I mean, think about leaders nowadays. When was the last time a leader willingly gave up their seat because they felt that someone else was more qualified than them? It's unheard of. But in Judaism, leadership comes with humility, something that this parsha tells us. leadership comes with humility. Moshe, at the end of the Torah portion, says Moshe was the greatest. Adam was more humble than any other person. So as soon as they knew that Hillel knew this also, what Rashi states over here, simply that you bring it even on Shabbos, is a subject of a major episode in Jewish history. An episode which again launched Hillel into the leadership position and into the spotlight, which we continue to shine on him until today. Fine. I'm going to skip verse number 3, telling you the laws of the Korban Pesach, and verse number 4, 5. Okay, Kain Asu B'nai Yisrael. This is what the Jewish people do. Now here's where I want to jump to verse number 6. So the Jewish people bring the Korban Pesach. It's festive. It's exciting. And then says the pasuk Vayihi Anashim Asher Hayu Tmeim Lenefesh Adam. There were people who were ritually unclean, V'lo yachlu lasos haPesach, and they could not do the Korban Pesach. Bayom Ahu, on the 14th of Nisan. Vayikruvu lifnei Moshe, and they came in front of Moshe. V'lifnei Aaron bayom Ahu, and they came to Moshe and Aaron on that day. Says Rashi, lifnei Moshe v'li Aaron, because his name Yoshem v'is Medrash Ba v'Shalom. It must be that they went to both. Rashi says it must be that they approached, when it says they approached Moses and Aaron, it must be that they were together. Because if you read it in the verse, you may understand the words to be Lifnei Moshe. They first approached Moshe and then they approached Aaron. Rashi says that can't be. It must be they were sitting together. It doesn't make sense. It is inconceivable that they would first approach Moshe and then Aaron. Because if Moshe did not know, how should Aaron know? Everything Aaron knew, he knew from Moshe. So clearly they went to both of them. And they said, Vayomer Anashim Ha'ela, and they said, he said, we are ritually unclean, because we came in contact with a dead person. Why should we be excluded as not to bring the offering of God in the appointed time with the children of Israel? Now the question is, why were these people ritually unclean? And if they were ritually unclean because of their negligence, so then, yeah, you suffer the consequences. If you were not, if you weren't careful in the laws of purity, so then, yeah, so then you suffer the consequences of not being able to bring a sacrifice. So the Rashi doesn't bring this, but the Talmud addresses. The Talmud tractate Pesachim. Who are these people? Who are these people who are ritually unclean and therefore could not bring this sacrifice? And they were claiming that we shouldn't miss out. In other words, that their ritual uncleanliness was not due to negligence, was not due to irresponsibility. Somehow they felt that whatever we've been doing doesn't warrant us missing out on doing a mitzvah. So here's what the Gemara says. Those people, mihayu, who were they? Who were these people? Says the Gemara, several answers. One answer is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Haglili, who states these people were the Nosei Arono Shel Yosef, that these are the people who were carrying the Aron, the ark, or the casket, if you may, of Yosef. We know that Yosef was carried out of Egypt, and Moshe Rabbeinu himself made sure that Yosef would be taken out of Yosef's body, Yosef's bones would be taken from Egypt. Someone was carrying those bones. So according to Yosef, these are the people who are carrying the bones of Yosef. Carrying a body, carrying the bones, even just the bones, is how they contract the tumah. But they were doing a mitzvah. So they said, our actions are not sinful, our actions are not negligent, therefore we shouldn't miss out. There's another opinion. The other opinion is these were the two people, Mishael and Eltzaphan. The people over here were those who carried, if you recall, in the Torah portion of Shmini, at the inauguration of the temple, which took place on Rosh Chodesh. So you have Nadav and Avihu, the two sons of Aaron, go into the temple, and they die inside the temple because they brought the incense when they weren't supposed to. So who carried them out? So the Torah says the people who carried out Nadav and Avihu were Mishael and Eltzaphan. Those are the people who carried them out. Those are the people who carry them out. So those are the people who are tummy. Again, people who weren't doing anything wrong. They just were carried. They had fulfilled a mitzvah by doing so. And finally, that's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yitzchak says they were actually referring to, there's no specific people, but there is a concept called a mace mitzvah. A mace mitzvah means if you come across a dead body on the road or any situation in which a body is not being tended to, then there's a special mitzvah to take care of that body. Even a Kohen Gadol, the high priest, who's required to retain a level of purity that he can't even go to the funeral of his own parents, his own spouse. He cannot defile himself to anyone. The exception is a mace mitzvah, that if there's a body on the road, on the side, then the Kohen Gadol is allowed to come in contact with the body to make sure that it is buried. There's all sorts of laws connected to a mace mitzvah. So according to the opinion of Rabbi Yitzchak, these are people who were involved in a mace mitzvah. But whatever the reason being, whether it was the bones of Yosef, whether it was the bones of Nadav and Avihu, or it was a mace mitzvah, in each situation they had a very legitimate point, which is why should we miss out? Why should we miss out on being able to bring the carbon? And that's what they said. Lama nigara, why should we miss out? What does Rashi said? Rashi spells out the details of this conversation. It's very beautiful when you read through it. So what happens? They come to Moshe. So he said to them, so Moshe said to them, sacrifices cannot be offered in a state of ritual uncleanliness. I'm sorry, it's may not be your fault, but you're not allowed to bring a sacrifice. By the way, an interesting law is that if the entire community, or I should say, if the majority of the community is impure, then you can bring a sacrifice in a state of impurity. If the majority of the community is tahar, pure, then individuals cannot bring a sacrifice in a state of impurity. But if the majority of the community becomes impure, then the entire community is allowed to bring sacrifices in a state of impurity. The power of community. Anyway, so they said to him, Amrullah, let the ritually clean Kohanim sprinkle the blood for us, and let ritually clean people eat the meat of the karba. And he said to them, I don't know. Moshe said, you're right. You know what? I don't know. Wait, and I will hear. Like a disciple who is confident of hearing from his teacher's mouth. Moshe Rabbeinu says, you know what? Good question. Let me go ask God. That's verse number 8. Let me wait and see what God instructs for us to do. Says Rashi, just the fact that Moshe was able to say that is so profound. That Moshe Rabbeinu could turn to someone and say, you know what, I'll get an answer for you. I'll talk to God and I'll get an answer for you. Never in history was there another prophet who had the ability to say something like that. Never in history do we have someone else who was able to turn to anyone and say, I will get an answer for you from God. Every other prophet in history was at the whim of maybe receiving prophecy, maybe not. It is only Moshe. When we think of the greatness of Moshe's prophecy, that's what the Rambam says. Maimonides says he was like talking to a friend that you know that they are available on demand. Moshe was the only one who had God available on demand. Even though, once we're bringing that up, there is a Gemara, I believe, which says that for 30, maybe it was 38 years straight, God did not communicate with Moshe. But during this period of time, when God was in communication with Moshe, it was at such a level that Moshe had the confidence to say, wait a minute, and I'll get right back to you. That's what Rashi says over here. Fortunate is the mortal who is so confident for whenever he wished. For whenever he wished, he could speak to the Shekhinah. How now Rashi, the next part of Rashi addresses something else which is very interesting, which is why does this law, which we're going to see, God is going to say, okay, you have the opportunity to bring Pesach Sheni. Why wasn't it said in the first place? In other words, why didn't God tell Moshe, tell the Jewish people to bring a carbon Pesach, and if they can't bring it the first Pesach, they should bring it the second Pesach 1 month later? Why is it not taught the way the rest of Torah is taught? And that's what Rashi is addressing. He says this portion really should have been said through Moshe, like the rest of Torah. God spoke to Moshe, tell the Jewish people. But these people merited that it be said through them, for merit is brought through the meritorious. Of course, God knew and intended that there should be a Pesach Sheni. But God said, instead of me just giving it to the Jewish people, this Pesach Sheni, let me wait for them to demand it. And when they demand it, I'll give it to them. This way they get more credit, because these Jews will always know we caused this mitzvah. If we're to think about it, this is really the only mitzvah in the Torah which we inspired. There's 613 commandments. 612 of them were given, as we say, uninitiated. God gave them to us. And there's one which we initiated, which we caused, so to say. And that's this mitzvah. And the Rebbe talks about the beauty of that idea. And that is that God almost let us be a partner in this mitzvah. That God says, God said, you demanded it, you got it. No other mitzvah is like that. And that's why this mitzvah is so beautiful, even as we don't no longer bring that carbon Pesach, but the message of this mitzvah continues to be a very resounding message. Here's what so going on. Let's read through the story. Let us wait and see what God instructs you. By Dabra Hashem Moshe Lamer, God spoke to Moshe saying, Dabra b'nei Yisrael Lamer, tell the Jewish people, Ish Ish ki yatam nefesh, verse number 10, anyone who is impure, or far away, or for whatever reason, future generations, on the second month, on the 14th day, Bein Arbaim in the afternoon, he should bring the matzah, umrarim yichlu, should eat the matzah and bitter herbs. And the same rules apply, same rule applies as the first Pesach. Fine. So this is the story of the second Pesach. I just want to share one point, which I think we can take from this, and that is like this. In life we talk about second chances, and it's a heavy topic. Each of us think about when we're in life we would like to be granted a second chance. It could be a difficult conversation to have. So does Judaism provide second chances? So the previous Rabbi, Yossi Yitzchak Shneur, always used the day of Pesach Sheni, the 14th of Iyar, to focus on this idea of Nishta Kain Farfalin, that God provides second chances when it comes to serving God, when it comes to doing a mitzvah, when it comes to an area in my life where I could and should be better, God will provide a second chance. Second chances do exist when it comes to our relationship with God. Do we as human beings give other humans a second chance? Maybe, maybe not. That's maybe when we should emulate our Creator. We think if God gives second chances, we should give our friends or someone who's hurt us, give them a second chance. But there is a very significant difference between the first opportunity that you are given and the second opportunity you are given. And you see this to be true in many situations of life. And that is, the first opportunity is given to you. The second opportunity you have to earn. The second opportunity you have to demand. And that's perhaps one of the most profound messages of this whole story. Like so many other mitzvahs, it's an idea which is significantly more than just the halacha of the actual situation of the Karban Pesach. God is telling us the message of second chances. But by waiting for the Jewish people to demand and say, Lama Nigara, Why did we miss out? From here, we learn that often when it comes to second chances in our relationship with God, the first chance is usually given to us. The first opportunity, God gives it to us. We may take advantage of it, we may not. But if we didn't, and now we want to be given a second chance in that area, often the only way to get it is if we demand it. That second chance we have to work a little bit harder for than the first chance. And in fact, that's why, going back to the first point we made, the Talmud says that these people who demanded a second chance really made the rest of the Jewish people look bad. Because as we pointed out, for 38 years, for 39 years, they didn't bring the Karban Pesach from the desert. And here you have a group of Jews who had a legitimate excuse not to bring it. In other words, they could have said, think about these people who were carrying bodies as a mitzvah. They could have said, okay, we're involved in a mitzvah, we're exempt from the Karban Pesach. Instead of having that attitude of we're exempt, we haven't done anything wrong, we can't bring a Karban Pesach, that's fine. Instead, they said, no, we want the opportunity. I demand the opportunity to serve you, God. I once heard a very beautiful description from a Rabbi Chazan, and he said he once sat, I think he said it was Erev Yom Kippur, and he went to visit the bedside of an older man who was ill, and this person was bedridden. And the man said to him, they were talking, and he at some point the man said, Rabbi Chazan was talking to him, and he said, you want to know what to do the first thing in the morning when I wake up and I turn to God? He says, I turn to God and I say, God, please give me the ability and the halachic permissibility to pray to you today. And what he meant by that is that unfortunately, in some situations, if a person is unclean, if a person's body is unclean, you're not allowed to daven. You're not allowed to mention God's name if one's body is unclean. And sadly, in some situations, a person is in a hospital condition or bedridden where they can't clean themselves, or they're, for whatever reason, their situation is not clean, they're not allowed to daven. Now, certainly they're exempt from davening. There is no, they are not in any way held responsible for that. It's for reasons beyond their control. So a person can, in such a situation, can say, look, God, you put me in this situation. You made me right now unhealthy, and I'm unable to daven. That's not on me, it's on you, God. But instead of that, this man said to Rabbi Chazan, he said, the first thing I turn to God is I pray to God to be able to pray to God. I pray that I should be able to pray today properly, that my body should be clean enough, not so for my comfort, but for the ability to pray to you. And that connects to here too, because the Jewish people who were impure, and again, impure for righteous reasons, could have said, look, God, you put me in this situation. You wanted me to carry the bones of Yosef. You wanted me to tend to the mace mitzvah. I have every right not to bring Karban Pesach. I shouldn't feel any guilt about it. This wasn't about guilt. This is that I know there's an opportunity to bring a Karban. I want to do it, even if I have every reason not to. I'm perfectly excused, but I want to do it. I want to have the opportunity to do this mitzvah. And once these people made that demand, God says, you are lucky enough that out of all the mitzvahs of Torah, you're the ones who are going to inspire a new one. And you're the only ones like that. And that's the depth of this story and the everlasting messages of the story, the idea of that there's always second chances, but we have to demand it. We have to work for it, and we have to turn to God and say, I want that second chance. And if we say it with passion, we say it in a way that's real, and we mean it, then God will provide that second chance in our ability to serve. All right, have a great remainder of the week, everyone. God bless you all, and I look forward to studying together again soon.
Thank you.
Good Shabbos.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.